Before you listen, if you enjoy the stories and want to hear more, then please consider subscribing. Most of you listening aren't subscribed, so please take this time to subscribe. Turn on notifications so you'll never miss a story and be the first to hear. You'll also be supporting me. Thank you. If you ever find yourself scouring Craigslist for a bargain, just remember, sometimes it's just too good to be true. Yeah, I've learned that the hard way, trying to find an iPhone 14 for my kid. He had been yammering on and on about it, promising me that he'd use it for educational purposes. Yeah, right, I know my son. Those educational purposes were most likely gotta be hours on TikTok and whatever newfangled game was trending. Anyway, I'm a sucker for a deal, and the bank account wasn't exactly brimming, so I went hunting on Craigslist. Lo and behold, there it was. A shiny iPhone 14 at a price that didn't have me clutching my chest in horror. The seller was quick to answer my email, saying he was some tech guy and got it as a gift and already had one. Seemed legit. Alright, so this is where the plot thickens. This seller, this tech-savvy Joe, didn't want to meet in some coffee shop or a bustling mall. Nah, he picked a corner of town that was about as welcoming as a rattlesnake in a sleeping bag. Now, I'm no chicken, but this place wasn't exactly on a neighborhood watch, if you get what I'm saying. But being a dad, you sometimes gotta put on your superhero cape and brave the storm, all for your kids. I'm sure some of you can relate, right? So, with a gulp and a prayer, I hopped into my faithful jalopy and pointed it towards this less than savory part of town. As I pulled up, the place was something right out of a late-night crime thriller. Think dimly lit streets, the neon lights from the dingy bars flickering ominously, graffiti-covered walls, and a general air of you ain't from around here are, hanging heavy. You know, the works. But the guy I was meeting? As ordinary as they come. Your average Joe, khaki pants, plaid shirt, and a cat that had seen better days. He was leaning against a beat-up van, idly checking his watch, making him seem less like a Craigslist crook and more like a dude waiting for his bus. He was casual, almost friendly, making small talk about the weather and the latest football game. Nothing about him made my alarm bells ring. Maybe I was too relieved to see he wasn't some shady character, or perhaps I was just too eager to get the phone and bolt. Either way, I handed over the cash, he gave me the phone, and I was back in my car faster than you can say Craigslist. Thinking back, I should have known better. I should have noticed the signs. But all I could think about was getting back home, away from this part of town that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Little did I know, my adventure was just beginning. You'd think that after that nerve-wracking pickup I'd be home free, right? Oh, how I wish that were the case. Just when I thought I could kick back and enjoy the look of joy on my kid's face, life decided to throw me another curveball. It wasn't long after we started playing around with the phone, reveling in its tech wizardry, that it froze. Nothing would work. It was as stubborn as a mule refusing to budge. We tried everything we could think of, but it was as good as dead. We were stumped, puzzled, and a growing sense of uneasiness started to creep up on me. But before we could figure out what was going wrong, the real drama kicked in. It wasn't just a knock on our door. It was a loud, authoritative thump that echoed through the house, setting our hearts racing. You know the kind of knock that only comes from a person of authority, a sound that immediately sends a creepy sensation down your back. My mind was already swirling with worst-case scenarios as I opened the door. Police. In their stern, no-nonsense uniform, badges glistening, their faces stern. They weren't there to warn us about a neighborhood burglary spree, no. They were there for the phone. My heart dropped in my stomach as they told the iPhone 14, the one that I had just bought off a harmless-looking tech guy, was stolen. Apparently, the moment we hooked it up to our Wi-Fi, it pinged somewhere in their system, and it didn't take them long to trace it back to us. My home, usually a sanctuary of warmth and comfort, turned into an interrogation room. Questions were fired like a volley of bullets. How did I get the phone? Who sold it to me? Where did we meet? Every answer I gave was met with skeptical looks, making me feel more like a criminal than a victim. Hours turned into what felt like days. Each minute was a nightmare, a horrifying blend of regret, fear, and disbelief. My mind kept playing the events of the day over and over again, trying to figure out where I went wrong, wishing I could take it all back. I learned a lot that day about the perils of online buying, about how one misstep could land you in a world of trouble. I had the sweet bike, not your average pedal to the metal. This was the kind that turned heads as you zipped past. A custom beauty I'd spent months saving for, my pride and joy, my go-to transport for work. So picture this. It was a Wednesday morning, clear skies with just a hint of chill in the air, an average midweek day by all counts. I was cruising on my custom beauty, the wind kissing my face as I navigated the city streets, heading towards work. I remember, as I usually did, tossing a grin at my reflection in the storefront windows, proud of my metallic steed. I parked my bike right outside my workplace in its usual spot. This was a place I trusted. It was part of my routine, and up until that day, it had never given me a reason to worry. I wrapped the chain around the body, heard the satisfying click of the lock, gave my bike a low pat, a part of my daily ritual. I headed inside, leading my precious ride under the watchful eyes of the city. As the day wore on, I found myself glancing outside from time to time, as though some sixth sense was acting up. But each time my bike was there, right where I'd left it, untouched. And with each check, I felt more at ease. Finally, it was time to call it a day. I grabbed my helmet and headed out, already anticipating the rush of the evening ride. But as I stepped outside, the world around me seemed to come to a sudden halt. Where my bike once stood proud and solitary, there was a hollow space, an emptiness that was not just physical but echoed in my heart. The remnants of the cut chain lay discarded, their metallic gleam a stark reminder of the theft. I remember feeling a chill run down my spine, a sense of disbelief clouding my mind. My eyes scanned the vicinity, half expecting it to magically appear. But the reality was harsh. My bike was gone. The people around seemed to move in slow motion, their voices fading into a distant hum as I grappled with the violation. My trust in this familiar setting was shattered. The place I'd parked my bike countless times without an incident had turned into the scene of a crime. Here's where the plot gets a little twisted. With a heavy heart, I went home that day. The bus ride home never felt longer. Later that night, drowning my sorrows in a tub of ice cream, I found myself aimlessly scrolling through Craigslist. Lo and behold, there she was, my stolen beauty, out for sale in another city. My heart was beating fast in my chest as I stared at the familiar scratches on the handlebar, the custom artwork on the body. No doubt about it, it was mine. In that moment, a surge of righteous indignation washed over me. I was going to get my bike back, come hell or high water. So I hatched a plan. Posing as an interested buyer, I contacted the seller, played along with his game. There were countless thoughts running through my mind: fear, anticipation, anger. But above all, I was determined. The journey to this other city was nerve-wracking. Thoughts of confrontations, potential violence, possibly even danger to my life filled my mind. But the image of my bike, my beloved possession, under the control of some thief, had just added fuel to my resolve. I arrived at the meeting spot, my heart pounding in my chest. The seller was a shady character, greasy hair, a suspicious glint in his eye, the kind of guy who looked like he had a rap sheet. But seeing my bike there, chained and helpless, I swallowed my fear and decided to push through with my plan. Casually, I asked if I could test ride the bike, a reasonable request for any buyer. As I swung my leg over the familiar frame, gripped the handlebars I'd held so many times before, I could hardly believe I was so close to getting it back. The ride was a short one, just around the corner and out of sight. But that was all I needed. Quickly, I loaded the bike into my car parked nearby. The adrenaline rush was intense. My hands were shaking as I dialed the police, explaining the situation and giving them the location. I drove away, leading my bike thief bewildered and confused, his ill-gotten payday evaporating before his eyes. Not long after, I saw the familiar flashing lights of a police car. Relief flooded over me. It was over. I had done it. I had reclaimed what was mine. A stolen bike might seem insignificant to some, but to me it was more than just a ride. It was a symbol of my hard work, my determination, my freedom. As the police handled the situation, the satisfaction I felt was overwhelming. I had taken out a crook and won. Not only did I have my bike back, but it also ensured one less thief was roaming the streets. Despite the initial terror, the whole ordeal had left me stronger, bolder. The ride back home on my own bike was the sweetest journey I'd ever taken. My bike, once a symbol of my hard work, had now become a symbol of victory, a trophy of my courage. It was a wild, scary, but ultimately rewarding adventure that started with a simple Craigslist post. Let me take you back. I was getting tired of all the flaky matches on Tinder. The same old bios, the same adventurous profiles, and the same conversations that led nowhere. My buddy Jerry, he's the one that got me thinking about Craigslist. He'd actually found a couple of dates there, and it seemed like an out-of-the-box move, so I figured why not. So there I was, sitting in front of my computer, ready to venture into the wild world of Craigslist dating. It felt a bit like making a Tinder profile, but with the added mystery of not knowing what kind of person I would attract. I stared at the blank space where my ad was supposed to go, my mind filled with uncertainties. I wanted to be honest but not too vulnerable, funny but not try hard, laid back but not lazy. I wanted to encapsulate my entire being in just a few lines without sounding too full of myself or too underwhelming. I started to realize that crafting a Craigslist ad was a bit like walking a tightrope. I wanted to start with something catchy, something that could grab a potential date's attention in the middle of browsing through electronics and used furniture, but what was catchy without being cheesy. After what seemed like hours of contemplation, I decided to open with a joke. Failed to find love on Tinder, so I'm resorting to the same place I'd find a used lawnmower. It was corny, but it had a bit of charm. It showed I had a sense of humor and was self-aware enough to acknowledge the absurdity of looking for a date on Craigslist. Next, I moved on to describing myself. I didn't want to oversell, but I didn't want to undersell either. After all, there's a fine line between humble and boring. I finally settled on just a regular guy with an irregular love for bad dad jokes and good books. I'm a software developer by day and amateur guitarist by night. Now came the hard part, describing the kind of woman I was looking for. It was crucial not to sound too picky or too desperate. After much pondering, I decided to keep it light and playful. I wrote, seeking a woman who can bear with my cooking experiments, tolerate my guitar solos, and engage in deep conversations about everything from Star Wars to Sartre. After proofreading the ad for any typos or potential red flags, I took a deep breath and clicked post. I remember that moment vividly. It was a mixed bag of fear, anticipation, and excitement. I was stepping into uncharted waters, putting myself out there in the most public and unpredictable platform there is. We decided to meet at a coffee shop downtown. Eliza was as radiant as the sun in her sundress, and her laughter was contagious. I felt like I was sitting with a high school crush, the kind that gives you butterflies in your stomach every time she looks your way. You know, the movie kind of date. We talked for hours. I found myself sharing things that I hadn't told anyone else. Eliza was captivating, a wonderful listener, and she had this knack for making you feel like you're the only person in the world. Before I knew it, it was time to leave. I paid for our coffees and said goodbye, hoping to see her again soon. But that's when things started to unravel. The next day, I woke up to a barrage of notifications. My bank, unusual activity on my card, I was flabbergasted. There were charges from online shopping sites, a few high-end restaurants, even a flight ticket to some exotic destination. It felt like the floor beneath me had given away. Could it be possible? Was Eliza behind this? I didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was staring me right in the face. In my rush to impress Eliza, I'd handed my card to the barista while she was sitting right there, her eyes probably following every move of my hands as I punched in the pin. It felt like a punch to the gut. I felt so stupid. I immediately blocked my card and reported the matter to the police, but Elizabeth, or whatever her real name was a ghost. The email she used was untraceable, and she had vanished into thin air. My dreams of finding a partner were shattered, replaced by feelings of betrayal and stupidity. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of police statements, bank disputes, and a lot of self-loathing. In my quest for a relationship, I'd handed a thief the keys to my life. It was a tough lesson, but one I learned the hard way. Ever since that day, I've realized the importance of caution, especially when it comes to matters of the heart. I was looking for love, but instead I got scammed, and it's a nightmare I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. I'm sharing my story, not for sympathy, but as a warning. The world can be a scary place, especially when you let your guard down. I remember some time ago I was feeling a bit like a millionaire, ready to drop some cash on a new ride. I mean, not brand new, but new to me, you get the drift. Now I didn't have the dough for a showroom stunner, but Craigslist, my trusty old friend, was my go-to. Man, oh man, the day of the meetup, I was buzzing like a kid on Christmas morning. It was a little way out of town at an old warehouse-turned parking lot, with the sun bearing down on a bevy of cars of all shapes and sizes. The Mustang was tucked away at the far end of the lot, but it was hard to miss. It sat there, black and gleaming, an embodiment of raw power and freedom. The sight of it alone was enough to get my heart racing. It was every bit the classic muscle car, sleek, mean-looking, and just a little bit intimidating. The seller was leaning against the car, looking about as interesting as a loaf of bread. A middle-aged dude dressed in a worn-out denim jacket and a cap pulled low over his eyes. He had this air about him that was hard to describe, a sort of detached indifference that put me slightly on edge. But then again, it wasn't a social visit, and I was more interested in the car than making conversation. I approached the Mustang, my eyes taking in the details. There were some scratches here and there, the paint chipped in places, and the leather seats were worn from use. The dashboard was dusty, and the floor mats looked like they'd seen better days. But beneath the rough exterior, the car had a sort of charm. It felt like it had stories to tell, and I was all ears. Then came the moment of truth. I slid into the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel. It was like a handshake, a sort of unspoken agreement between the car and me. The ignition roared to life at the turn of the key, the sound echoing in the parking lot, a symphony to my ears. It drove like a dream, responsive and agile, the hum of the engine a sweet melody. I was sold. As I handed over the cash and out the keys, the guy just nodded, pocketing the money without so much as a thank you. He watched as I drove away, a small speck in his rear view mirror. Little did I know I wasn't just taking home a car that day. I was bringing home a whole lot of trouble. I was in my own little world, driving home, picturing myself pulling up to my friends' houses in this beast. It was every bit as smooth as the seller had promised. I had visions of road trips and joyrides, my own little slice of freedom on four wheels. But then reality took a sick, twisted turn. I got home, parked my new Cherry in the driveway, and started to give it a proper once-over. You know, checking out all the nitty-gritty details that you miss in your first burst of excitement. That's when I opened the glove box. There it was. Sitting there like an uninvited guest, a gun wrapped up in a clear plastic bag. My heart started beating like a drum. What the hell was I supposed to do with this? It was like something out of a movie, but it was way too real. Now, I ain't no criminal, but I've watched enough crime shows to know that touching that thing was a terrible idea. I backed away, my mind racing, and grabbed my phone. I punched in those 3 numbers that no one ever wants to dial unless they really have to. As soon as I got off the phone with the cops, I felt like I was living in a bubble. The world outside seemed to go on as if nothing had happened, while my driveway was cordoned off like a crime scene. It was all a blur, the flashing lights, the uniformed officers, and the whirlwind of questions. Eventually, they managed to track down the original seller. He was holed up in some godforsaken part of the city, and it turned out he had a whole list of charges against him, from theft to illegal possession. I'd bought a car from a career criminal. In the end, I vacuumed the car, sans gun, of course. The police thanked me for my cooperation, but all I felt was a wave of relief washing over me. I had dodged a bullet, both metaphorically and literally. It was one hell of a day, one that I'll probably tell my grandkids about one day. They'd probably think it's a made-up story, but man, if only they knew. The world is full of surprises, and not all of them are pleasant. So next time you're buying a car, don't forget to check the glove box, folks. Thanks for listening in. If you like these stories and want to hear more, then please subscribe and like and support this new channel. We have more stories for you to listen to.